Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 147 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Now, go and check out our new book. We released it 1 month ago. It's called From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. It's available on your Kindle, only $2.99 right now, or you can have the paperback for $9.99. I promise you, it's a great deal. Go out and check that out. Now, today on Friday, we have a very, very special treat for all of our listening audience. I've been thinking about this for the last 2 weeks, and I couldn't wait to get here today. We have with us David Page. He is a two-time Emmy winner. He changed the world of food television by creating, developing, and executive producing the groundbreaking show Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Before that, as a network news producer based in London, Frankfurt, and Budapest, he traveled through Europe, Africa, and the Middle East doing two things: covering some of the biggest stories in the world and developing a passion for some of the world's most incredible food. Once back in the States, he pursued his passion both personally and professionally, show producing Good Morning America, his substantial food coverage, including cooking segments by Emeril Lagasse, creating Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, and hands-on producing its first 11 seasons that took him deep into the world of American food, its vast variations, its history, its evolution, and especially the dedicated cooks and chefs keeping it vibrant. His next series, The Syndicated Beer Geeks, dove deep into the intersection of great beer and great food. It's those experiences, that education, the discovery of little-known stories and facts that led David to dig even deeper and tie all of these different strands together in his new book. It's called Food Americana: The Remarkable People and Incredible Stories Behind America's Favorite Dishes. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
It's just an honor. I have to tell you, for all the foodies that we have listening on our podcast today, I know they are so excited about this. I know that they are going to love this interview. They are going to share it widely. So I know that we are going to be breaking some ground here today. I want to make sure that our listeners know a little bit about your background, which I think is just so fascinating to me. You know, let's start with college, right? You decided on Oklahoma State for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why did you choose Oklahoma State? And then what happened after that?
Well, I've been going to a prep school and didn't really want to continue that sort of environment. So I looked around for the opportunity to go someplace else. And I had already started in broadcasting. I was working on a local radio station in my teens. And my dad, who was the dean of a community college, was a big fan of public education. So we started looking around for a place that would fit. Turned out Oklahoma State had a terrific broadcasting program. So out I went.
Very nice. And how did everything go there?
It was terrific, if brief. I had the time of my life for a semester. Worked on the college radio station, KVRO, did a fair amount of drinking and playing, but then decided that I was homesick for the East Coast and had an opportunity to become the lowest employee on the totem pole at a big time radio station in New York. So I moved back to become a copy boy at WNEW Radio, which doesn't exist anymore, which was one of the great middle of the road radio stations in America. Now, a copy boy's job was basically to rip stories off the wire machines. And back in those days, before the kind of computer printers that we have now, that meant paper that was about 7 layers deep with carbon paper between each one. I don't know if you remember carbon paper.
I do.
But by the end of a shift, I looked like a coal miner. I was just covered in ink. But I came back to Oklahoma after I'd been in New York for a while, I decided to continue my education. So I signed up this time at Oklahoma University, where my roommate from OSU had transferred, and we got an apartment off campus. And that was when I got my first big break in the business. I was hired to be the nights and weekends utility player at WKY Radio, which I assume it still exists, but at the time it was one of the two big heavyweight stations in Oklahoma City. And beyond that, because Oklahoma City, yes, there's Tulsa, but basically Oklahoma City being the pinnacle of everything Oklahoma, working at that news operation, you got to do a lot more than just cover a city. It really was a statewide operation. And I got some very good early training in journalism there.
That's fantastic. The twists and turns that life deals us. It's so interesting to me. We have to talk about the Triple D. You are the creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. This is one of my family's favorite shows, in full transparency. When I talked about our interview, they were so jealous. They're like, hey, can we be a part of this? I'm like, listen, you'll watch the recording. Don't worry about it.
You're overly kind, but I'll be glad to talk about the show.
Yes, of course. And you're also a longtime journalist. I mean, we're talking about 2 decades, foreign and domestic, with ABC News and NBC News, and you transitioned to food television and then now books. I'm just curious, tell our audience, how did Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives come about?
I left network journalism to try to make it on my own. And what that means is you tell people you're freelance, but what it really means is you're intentionally unemployed. So when I made that move, I looked around to find anybody who might pay me some money. And I realized that Al Roker was running his own production company at this point. Al had actually worked for me on the Weekend Today show. Before he was on the main show, he was on the weekend show. A partner and I co-created that show. So I called Al up and said, hey, I need money. And he said, sure. Al was doing a substantial amount of work for the Food Network at that point. And he used me in several cases to subcontract hours to, one of them being about the history of diners. After I'd done several projects for Al, I started pitching the network myself because candidly, financially, it would be better without a middleman. And the network consistently took my phone calls and consistently said, no, thank you. And I would call and pitch, call and pitch, call and pitch, and they say, no, no, no. So one day I'm on the phone with a delightful programming executive there who was kind enough to listen to me. And she finally said, somewhat in frustration, do you have anything else about diners? And I said, well, sure, I'm developing a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. And she said, that sounds interesting. We have a meeting on Tuesday. Get me a write-up on Monday. Now, this was either late Thursday or late Friday. The problem was I did not have a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives in development. I had just made up the name on the spot, pulled it out of some part of my anatomy. You can fill in the blanks. And now I had to spend the weekend calling around the country to try to come up with a show proposal. I had to find places that would fit into an hour. And I did. And on Monday, I sent her a write-up, and they had a meeting Tuesday. And shortly thereafter, they commissioned a 1-hour special. They were not thinking of this as any kind of long-term vehicle. What they had is that they had Guy Fieri had won their second annual Food Network Star Contest back at a time when they really thought that this competition would produce Food Network stars for the future. As it turned out over time, it didn't. Most of the winners get a short run show and then kind of disappear. But Guy was different. Guy was an immense talent. And they were looking for a primetime vehicle for him and had asked a couple of big deal production companies to submit proposals. And to fill the time until those proposals came in and they could put together a primetime show, they wanted to keep his face in front of the audience. So they commissioned this hour. Well, the hour did well. And the big time proposals that they got turned out to be highly disappointing. So with nowhere else to turn, they commissioned one short season of Diners. After the first 2 episodes aired and the numbers were very good, a programming executive tried to tamp down my expectations by explaining that, look, this is all fine and good, but your show doesn't have legs. We just don't think there are enough places throughout the US for it to carry on for a long period of time. But 2-3 seasons, that'll be great. I left after season 11. I think they're in season 30 something now. So to quote noted screenwriter William Goldman about the entertainment industry, and I quote, "No one knows anything."
What a fantastic story. I mean, for all the college students that are listening right now, I hear a story about perseverance. I hear a story about his network. So Al Roker making that connection to the Food Network. I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned here. And thank you for telling us all about it, because I don't think anybody ever bothered to understand the history and the background.
Let me add something for college kids. I know increasingly my path, which was to drop out without a degree and just keep working, is not the path to follow these days. A degree is much more important. But to a great extent, entertainment or journalism is a trade. It is, you can learn the nuts and bolts of it by doing it. In fact, you have to learn it by doing it. So if you're trying to get into journalism or broadcasting, my number one piece of advice is A, get a liberal arts education. So when they turn the mic on and it's your turn to talk, you actually have the knowledge about which to talk. And number two, try to get jobs as early as you can.
Yeah.
Just get a leg up on the competition.
Great lessons. I absolutely love it. And you tell this great story in your book, Food Americana, that your grandmother used to make Jewish spaghetti. Tell our audience, what is the backstory on that dish?
One of tolerance and gasping for air while dining. When I was growing up, my grandmother, my mother's mother, used to make Jewish spaghetti, as she described it. It was spaghetti, boiled, I guess, first, in a pan with onions and ketchup. And that was that. And it was kind of disgusting. But as I say in the book, it's a metaphor for all of American cuisine. Here you have a woman who had escaped the anti-Semitism, the violent anti-Semitism of pre-World War II Poland, embracing a new country and assimilating, quote unquote, by making what she thought of as an American food, which in fact was spaghetti, which obviously started out as Italian. And what we've done in this country in creating American cuisine is we have adopted and adapted the cuisines of multiple other countries and multiple other cultures, put a twist on it, made it our own one way or another. And now you have a variety of formerly international cuisines that are considered American. Pizza's American. Frankly, sushi, as we eat it here, is now American. An executive, a high-ranking executive for the company that produces the most prepackaged sushi in America, explained to me that in her day, for her friends, a grab-and-go lunch was a hamburger. For her kids today, it's sushi.
Wow. It's just amazing how all of this has happened over the last century here. This is just fascinating. You also talk in the book about the candlelight vigil that Penn State students held when their local Taco Bell suddenly shut down. What happened there?
It was a remarkable story. There was a Taco Bell close to campus. That was the place you went at 3 a.m. when you were drunk to get some garbage food so that when you woke up in the morning, you could feel worse. And please excuse me, Taco Bell, I'm not calling you garbage food. But the place shut down with no notice. And the kids were just jolted One of them started, I think, more as a joke than anything else, to organize a late night vigil outside their long lost Taco Bell. And on the night, it turned out 200 or 300 kids showed up. They were lighting candles. They built a shrine. Some were holding lighters or cell phones in the air like it was at a concert. And one of the students who was there explained to me that, it started out kind of seemingly as a gag, but it became serious. People were mourning the loss of their favorite available late night restaurant. And what's interesting about this is they were not mourning, best I can tell, the food. They were mourning the establishment.
Yeah.
And what they probably didn't realize was that, in fact, the single most important force in nationalizing Mexican food in America was Taco Bell.
Mm-hmm.
Up to the point in the 50s when Taco Bell began its inexorable march, there was Mexican food only in places that were close to, or in fact, prior to the Mexican-American War, had been part of Mexico. It was regional. It was Taco Bell with their version of it, and they'll tell you today, look, this isn't Mexican food, it's our interpretation of Mexican food. But it was Taco Bell, as they moved across the country, that introduced the concept of Mexican food to people, who then could move on to Mexican restaurants as they opened up, doing Mexican-American cooking. There's the whole authenticity crowd that will complain that Mexican-American food isn't, quote, authentic, a word I hate, meaning it isn't what they eat in Mexico today. Okay, I'll tell you something else. The food in Mexico today has evolved since 200 years ago, but the bottom line is there are legitimate cuisines that have evolved in America from other cuisines. No, Mexican-American food is a different cuisine, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. Chinese-American food is a different cuisine. Italian-American food is a different cuisine. And that's fine. They're legitimate cuisines. I love many Mexican food items I can't get in the States, and I enjoy them when I'm in Mexico. It's different. Mexico, in fact, there is no national Mexican cuisine. Mexico is a group of regional cuisines, and increasingly, not just in Mexican, but in other cuisines, especially Chinese, a new round of immigration is bringing regional dishes to the States where non-Mexicans or non-Chinese can try them. And I think some of them are going to be incorporated into our version of their cuisine. For example, birria de res tacos, which is a spicy stewed beef in a taco on a flat top, flipped, and then served with a cup of consomme is the word. And you dip the taco and you go to heaven. It's remarkable. That's been a regional Mexican dish for a long time. It's now becoming extremely popular in the States. Pete Wells of the New York Times wrote up a birria taco truck in 2017. Shortly before completing the book, my wife and I drove to Philadelphia from the island we live on in South Jersey to go to a taco truck in South Philly serving birria de res tacos. And again, it was like going to heaven. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, this is just so fascinating. I mean, you tell the story about Penn State and Taco Bell. I think about our late night treks at 3 o'clock in the morning. I went to school at the University of Buffalo, home of the chicken wing, go to Duff's. And, we would take a 60-minute ride to Rochester so we can get a garbage plate, which is just mac and cheese and hamburger at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Aren't there French fries on that too?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Diners, we covered a place that did a garbage. It wasn't in Buffalo, though. It was in, Ohio.
Yeah, really? Yeah, I'm sure it's spread. I mean, we had to go to Rochester in order to get it. So we took a 60-minute drive at 3 o'clock in the morning just to eat it. And so that was our Mecca. That was our, I guess, Taco Bell.
Yeah, but you're talking about something wonderful there, which is regional American foods.
Yeah.
I mean, in Buffalo, obviously, we'll get to wings in a minute, but you had beef on weck.
Yes.
Which, for people who don't know, is basically sliced roast beef, on a particular kind of roll. And what is the flavoring on the roll? There's something caraway, I think.
I think so. I think you're right.
But that's a roast beef sandwich that you can't get outside of Buffalo.
Correct.
Obviously, the Buffalo dish you can get outside of Buffalo now is wings,
right?
Which have a remarkable story. The Anchor Bar supposedly invented the buffalo wing, but
yes.
In the book, I talked to the daughter of John Young, who had a restaurant open in Buffalo before the Anchor Bar, or at least before the Anchor Bar was serving wings, and his place was called Wings and Things. And he was doing fried wings the way they were done at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. that he had visited, and reminiscent of his upbringing in a poor family, African American, where nothing on the chicken would go to waste. So he ate wings growing up. Now, his wings were different. First of all, you didn't have a drummy and a flat. You had a connected piece. Secondly, he had what was called mumbo sauce, which was a kind of red sauce that was both sweet and spicy. And there was no dipping in blue cheese. So now you're at a definitional issue. Was he the first buffalo wing, or is the buffalo wing defined by the way they first did it at the Anchor Bar, which is cut into pieces and dipped in blue cheese? It's a definitional argument. Now, what's interesting to me is how buffalo wings then went national, as they kind of trickled out of the Buffalo area. And one of the original founders of Hooters claims that, well, actually two of them I talked to, claim that they're the ones who nationalized the buffalo wing, because there was a guy in a bar in Fort Lauderdale, not a bar, a restaurant that was in a former gas station, and they heard about it, and they were living in the Tampa area, so they got in a van with some beer and vodka and took a road trip down to this place and tasted his wings and thought they were in the planning stages for Hooters. They thought, yeah, we can do this. And they claim that implementing the wing at Hooters is what began its march to become the national food that it is today. We cover in the book the 2019 Buffalo Chicken Wings Festival, which was a remarkable event with wings of all kinds. They had it in Solon Field, which is the largest ballpark in AAA baseball. In fact, the Toronto Blue Jays played there during the last season because of pandemic regulations. The place was jammed, and there were 8 million kinds of wings, which again gets back to a definition of what is a buffalo wing. Right. Can it be a buffalo wing if it's covered with Thai sauce?
So
and Anchor Bar now serves all sorts of variations. Yeah. I think they're even serving boneless wings, which are not wings at all, and which were invented simply because the demand for buffalo wings is huge, and chickens only have 2 wings each.
So fascinating. I love all the history. I think it's great. And I want to ask you, you're the right person to ask about this. Why do Americans love fast food so much? When I travel to other countries, they don't seem to have the same fascination with it that we do.
Well, first of all, approaching it from that angle, we are corrupting them with fast food. The largest growth sector for all of our fast food operators, the big ones, is international. And increasingly, you're seeing American fast food elsewhere in the world. But the first answer to your question, in my view, is the space race. Back in the 50s and especially the 60s, as fast food came into its own, it was hastened by the development of the interstate highway system, which made it possible to provide such places by exits and entrances. And secondly, this was a period of time post-war where, for the majority of America's population, those doing well, those not of minority groups, it was a time of unbridled optimism and faith in technology. And these newfangled fast food joints were just part of that. They were no different in our minds than the development of the Gemini space capsule. It was America moving forward into a scientific future. And then over time, of course, there are those who will contend, and I think they're probably right, that intentionally or unintentionally, the fast food industry hooked us on salt and fat.
Mm.
Our minds like that kind of stuff. And there's the added element of one of the main differences between us and cultures in Europe, he said, painting with the broadest brush possible, is that we're always rushing. We feel good about moving fast, and somehow moving fast is getting things done, even if we get less done in 40 hours a week than Germans do in 36. The point is, there was something virtuous about grabbing and going.
Yeah.
I think there is, at this point in time, as I point out in the book, a reevaluation among many people of what fast food ought to be. You're seeing better burgers, places like Smash Burger or Five Guys or BurgerFi, who are selling their burgers based on the marketing that it's better food, that it's made individually when you order it, that it doesn't sit under a heat lamp, hence it takes longer to make. And concomitantly, you're seeing, or have been for quite some time, a substantial increase in fast food using chicken. The American consumption of chicken surpassed that of beef several years ago. And according to industry experts, it ain't going back. Now, what do you do with that chicken? If you want to be healthy and feel good, you eat chicken. Of course, almost entirely the way we eat chicken is fried.
Right.
So, what's the value? What's the benefit? I guess it's better. The fast food chicken sandwich wars of 2019, however, showed how committed we are to that kind of fast food, and also was an example of excellent marketing on the part of Popeyes. But if you'll recall back to that, it was insane. You had lengthy lines outside all of these establishments. You had fist fights. There was actually a fatal stabbing, not to in any way make light of it, in a Popeyes line when apparently somebody tried to jump the line and things got out of hand. Mm-hmm. So the final answer after that long roundabout is convenience, science, and salt.
Wow. Love it. What a great summary. That is fantastic. I also have a question about COVID-19. Talk to our listeners a little bit about the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on what we eat and how we eat.
It's mostly how we eat. COVID-19 turned a lot of restaurants toward pickup, delivery, and drive-through.
Right.
Restaurants that never would have considered that as an option in the past. And we picked up or had delivered or drove through at levels not seen before, and they're not going to go back to where they were previously. You're going to see a significant uptick in taking food away from restaurants. You're even seeing restaurants that never would have considered drive-ins, considering drive-ins architecturally, including them in future plans. 7-Eleven is thinking about or testing a drive-through concept. Wow. There's another element, which is that restaurants figured out they didn't have to have the world's largest menus to make money, and it can be cheaper and simpler to pare back on menu size. There's another thing that came out of this too called ghost kitchens. Ghost kitchens are restaurants without the restaurant. They're large commercial kitchens that can produce food solely for delivery. Not even pickup, because there is no bricks and mortar restaurant. And you're seeing some chains actually establishing subsidiary brands, such as a wings brand, without that wings restaurant even existing. Mm-hmm. If you run a ghost kitchen, you can run 4 or 5 restaurants out of the same space. So economically, it makes perfect sense for the entrepreneur. And that's important as you look at what was happening to restaurants before the pandemic in high real estate cost areas like New York and San Francisco. They, along with Los Angeles, are generally considered to be the pinnacles of dining in the United States. And many terrific and long-standing restaurants had been closing, certainly in New York. I can't speak to San Francisco as much, but certainly in New York because they couldn't pay the rents.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be a reordering. The bottom line is we're going to be picking up and taking away a lot more than we used to.
So interesting. This ghost kitchen, the first time I heard about it was actually Guy. He opened up one of these ghost kitchens in Franklin, Tennessee, where I live. And so that was the first time I had heard about that. The other thing related to COVID-19, I saw that Chipotle was actually, I think just recently had announced that their electronic ordering system for the first time ever has now overtaken the amount of people that come into their restaurants to eat it in person, which I thought was really
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And even when you go into a restaurant now, the turn toward technology that took place during the pandemic is going to continue. You're going to see many more kiosks, much more lack of interface. Can you have more lack? I guess. A greater lack of interface with human beings. There are some restaurants, some fast food places now where the concept is you go in, you punch in your order, and then you go pick it up from a locker. There's a bunch of lockers on the wall, which kind of harkens back to my youth in New York when there was something called an automat, which was similar to our excitement with rockets and drive-thrus. You didn't interface with a human at all. You went and looked in these lockers, and you'd put a quarter in this one and open the door and take out your pie, and you'd put a quarter in this one and take out your hamburger. And that was nifty. I used to love to go to the automat with my grandparents.
That is very cool. Now, you and I, of course, we grew up in New York, and so we love the American bagel. As a matter of fact, I think we just found a halfway decent bagel shop in Nashville, but it still doesn't compare to the New York bagel. So I'm wondering, how did the bagel become an American dish? And tell our audience who sells the most bagels in America.
Okay. The bagel became an American dish because the Lender brothers, 3 of them in New Haven, figured out how to freeze them and how to mass produce them. The bagel came from Poland, where it was smaller and crispier, with immigrants to New York, where it got bigger and a little softer, but still quite chewy, and was owned by and limited to Jews like me. After a while, it started to trickle out into the rest of the New York population, which has historically been among the more adventurous eaters in America. After a while, it became a New York institution. Now, there are a couple of corollaries, he said, tripping over his own teeth, such as, how did we come to bagels and lox? Let me put one misnomer to rest. Jewish immigrants had not been eating lox, which we know as smoked salmon, in Europe. They had been eating smoked fish. And when they came to the United States, a poverty meal was smoked fish from what was called an appetizing store, herring typically. It was cheap, and you could get 2 meals out of a herring, because the first meal you would rub it on some bread and the oil would seep in, and that was meal number 1. Meal number 2 is to actually eat the herring. And there was also a sturgeon. Pardon me, I blanked on one of my favorite dishes. So you had a Jewish population that was eating bagels and that was going to these appetizing stores, which were basically smoked fish emporia, and buying smoked fish, not lox yet. And then the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, which made it possible to ship salmon from the Pacific Northwest to the East Coast. But it was a long trip. Salmon by itself would spoil. The way to preserve the salmon was to pack it in salt, which was a kind of brining. By the time it got to New York, it was covered with salt, and it was extremely salty. And if you sliced a piece of it, that was lox. Now, since then, most of what people refer to as lox is not salt brined salmon. It is salmon that's been smoked. You can get lox at a New York appetizing store, but you have to have a very specific taste for it because it's salty as hell. So now you've got bagels and you've got lox, and lox is really salty. And a farmer a dairy owner in upstate New York invents cream cheese. by accident. He was trying to duplicate French Neufchâtel. He didn't quite succeed. He ended up with cream cheese. The Breakstone Company, a dairy company that was imitating what he did now, went to the specific step of advertising in Yiddish specifically to the Jewish audience reading the Yiddish papers in New York, and doing it by writing specific ads. Other companies advertised in Yiddish, but all they did was translate their regular ads. The Breakstone Company's ads referred specifically to Jewish food items that would go well with cream cheese. No one has ever found an ad that suggested it be paired with lox, but it was obvious. Lox was salty, the cream cheese negated the sting of the salt. It all went so well on a bagel. Now you have bagels, lox, and cream cheese. Okay. Out in New Haven, the Lender brothers were running one of the first bagel bakeries ever to leave New York. It was opened by their father. And they wanted to increase their business. So they experimented with freezing and with something else. They leased, you couldn't buy it, they leased the first commercial automatic bagel making machine. And using that, they were able to turn out a tremendous number of bagels. Now, the various pieces of the automatic process required a thinner dough, which changed the bagel. For some reason, they also made it sweeter. Anyway, that less chewy, sweeter frozen bagel was then shipped to the rest of America where it caught on. So it was I talked to Marvin Lender about this. He's still alive and still a great guy, and has become quite a philanthropist with the earnings from having sold the company to one of the multinationals. He acknowledged, he said, look, New York bagels would not have caught on with a non-Jewish crowd outside of New York. They were too chewy. I'm summarizing for him, it was too much work. But the frozen bagels caught on fine. And at this point today, the bagel has become such a part of American society that the company that sells the most of them is Dunkin' Donuts.
Amazing.
But what's interesting now is everything is circular. There has been in recent years a real increase in artisanal bagel making. There are people all across the country who are going out of their way to try to make authentic New York bagels from scratch, including in some cases treating the water to mimic the mineral content of New York water. Whether it's the New York water, who knows, that debate has never been resolved. But you can get a remarkable homemade bagel in Denver, in any state, well, not any, but in many states between the coasts and obviously in LA. So hold out hope for your bagel shop in Tennessee, you know, and along with the upscaling of the bagel or the return to the artisanal past, a lot of these places are now smoking their own salmon too.
Wow. Fascinating. David, I hope you and I open up that bagel shop in Nashville because that's a moneymaker. That's all.
I'm in, just down the street from the Ryman.
I
took my Jewish mother-in-law to the Opry, my wife and I.
Very nice.
She's 102 now. I think she was 100 at the time. And we were in Nashville for a Jewish wedding. And we went to the Opry and we got front row seats and she had the time of her life. It was fantastic.
I love it. That is fantastic. That's really good. You know, the whole Lender bagel story and freezing it, and then that led to their success. It reminds me a lot of the Swanson story and the TV dinners, how they basically had these trains full of turkey that was essentially rotting, and they realized we can freeze it and then ship it all over the country.
Hey, listen, ingenuity is an amazing thing. Think of the tater tot.
Yeah.
The tater tot was invented by the Ora-Ida company because they had all this junk left, all the shavings left from the creation of their French fries, and they were looking for something to do with it.
Yeah.
Hence the tater tot.
Just amazing. I absolutely love that. You mentioned sushi a little bit before, and I was wondering, you know, how did this sushi, I mean, it's everywhere now. I mean, even gas stations are carrying sushi of all things. So how did that, you know, become an American dish now?
It became hip. Sushi came to the United States post Second World War as a rebuilding Japan started sending their executives here. And sorry, I lost your picture there. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Let me get back into it this way. There we go. Sorry. Sushi came to the United States with Japanese business executives who were sent here after World War II. And it started as a very small thing, a few restaurants making sushi specifically for Japanese clientele. And then the cool people found it. Yul Brynner was one of the first Hollywood stars to embrace sushi. He would eat at a sushi restaurant next door to the studio he was working at. His daughter told me that when he would come to New York, they'd get together and have sushi. It just became kind of a hip LA glitterati thing to do. And once sushi chefs recognized that there was a potential non-Japanese clientele here, they did to that food what every cultural group has done to its food to please us, which is they started making versions of it that were specifically suited for the American palate. And the gateway drug there was the California roll.
Sure.
The dispute, however, is whether it was first made for Japanese businessmen when fatty tuna was unavailable and the avocado was used to replace the fatty texture of fatty tuna. Nonetheless, the California roll became the thing that was not so dangerous for Americans to try. And this was in the 70s now, and there was talk of health. A government report came out suggesting we eat more fish, and it became the trendy thing to try. Over time, obviously, it has grown and evolved and developed to the point where it's one of our go-to foods.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Anybody who knows me, they know that I love New York pizza. I can't find a substitute for it in Nashville. Very, very difficult to find a real New York pizza. Talk to our audience a little bit more about what are the most popular styles of pizza.
Well, Detroit pizza has been on a roll over the last few years. It's a rectangular deep pie that was first made in pans that had been liberated from shops related to the auto industry in Detroit. Napolitano is having its moment. It's had it for quite a while. Although very few pizzerias make a real Napolitano because done correctly, it's a little soupy and needs to be consumed right away. Chris Bianco at Pizzeria Bianco in Phoenix, who's considered probably the leading artisanal pizza maker in America, says he doesn't make a Napolitano. He makes a pizza that is more like those you'd find in Puglia or even Rome with a crisper crust. And of course, New York style remains, as it has always been, extremely popular. There is Chicago deep dish, which I consider, despite having lived in Chicago, to be an abomination. But there are those who like it. It's representative of the fact that pizza, as much as any food in America, has taken on the character of wherever it's made.
Right.
You have pizza in St. Louis made with a processed cheese called Provel. That's what they had there. You have pizza, there's a pizza called Old Forge Pizza, which is made near about an hour from Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is another rectangular pie that is also made with a combination of processed cheeses and was invented to feed the coal miners back in the day. It's now so popular in that region that the little town of Old Forge has a sign out front at the city limits declaring itself the pizza capital of the world. And I was a little dubious, and then I talked to one of the pizzeria owners and he sent me a couple of pizzas, and I'm totally hooked. They make them two ways. One is red with the cheese on the top. One is white where the cheese is in the middle. They kind of fold the dough over. these are extraordinary. And I got them on Goldbelly. I'm not getting paid by Goldbelly, but the point is you can get that sort of thing pretty much anywhere now.
That is unbelievable. I love hearing these stories about pizza. And so I guess you'll agree with me that the Chicago deep dish is actually a casserole. Is that correct?
Yeah, but you know what? It's as valid as any other kind of pizza. If I'm in Chicago, I'd rather have one of their thin crusts, but
Yes.
to each his own.
That's great. And one last question for you. Are these Americanized cuisines, if we're talking about Chinese, Italian, Mexican, are these all valid, or should we all look for authentic dishes instead?
Oh, they're completely valid. Chow's chicken, as made in the United States, is a delight. It's nothing like General Chow's chicken as invented in Taipei.
Right.
But who cares? I'm much more concerned about the way food is made and what the ingredients are. I'd much rather have an honest dish made by hand for me when I order it by someone who gives a damn. From there, enjoy what you like and don't eat what you don't like.
Beautiful. Well said. So if our listeners, if they want to connect with you, maybe they want to buy your book, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, go to Amazon or Walmart.com or Barnes & Noble or any of the sites that sell books, and it's available there. And please pick it up. I'm very proud of it.
As you should be. This book is absolutely fantastic. I got a sneak peek at this book, and let me tell you, it is absolutely worth the purchase. Go and pick that up. It's called Food Americana, The Remarkable People and Incredible Stories Behind America's Favorite Dishes. David Page, you are my new best friend. What can I say? You and I mean, we can talk for hours and hours and hours, and I'm just not going to do that to you. I'm sure you have other things to do today. But
well, Michael, you are my new best friend, and if we're ever in the same place together, let's grab a meal.
Oh, absolutely. I would gladly do that, and I'll even pay. So
perfect.
There you go. I appreciate your time, David. And if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please like it and share it with other foodies all across America. Everybody has to pick up David Page's book. It's absolutely incredible. I promise you, I read it and it's great. Thank you so much to our listeners for listening. And we hope to see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much. Bye for now.